Welcome to another Physichat episode where I'm joined by our Head of Business Development Manager, Dominic Smith. In this episode, we're going to be chatting about radial shockwave versus focused shockwave. So yes, it's a big question that is always raised by clinicians and patients. So we shall try our best to answer that. We have also written an article where you can find this on our news section on the website if you prefer to read through it. So yeah, two types of obviously shockwave therapy that we're going to be chatting through, and yeah, it's important to know the key differences and the impacts of obviously clinical outcome, but then also what is best suited for clinicians to be using in practice. So Dom, initially, I think what would be good is just a sort of a summary really of the background of shockwave and obviously where these two types of shockwave have come from.
Yeah, no, and it's like you say, it's a very, very common question. It's kind of ties into the previous chat that we've done about which device is right for me. So hopefully this will give you a bit more sort of meat on the bones in terms of the actual technology themselves. The story behind Shockwave, I'll try and not give you the long-winded version of it, but essentially shockwave effects noted on human tissues in World War II, I believe it was, in the form of there was no outward injury of soldiers, but there was internal injuries. And from that point, scientists, investigations look at things of how you can harness that energy and saw how it was saw its destructive properties. And that led to lithotripsy, kidney stones, which has been used on millions of patients. I think that was I want to say the 70s or 80s. I can't remember, my memory's not serving me right here, but anyway, a while back. And since then, you had focus shockwave was developed because off the back of lithotripsy treatments, and in a couple of studies, they were seeing calcific buildup on the iliac crest in the pelvis. So prompted the question, well, is the actual energy actually stimulating growth as well as being destructive? Can it be regenerative? Short answer, yes. Focus shockwave into musculoskeletal indications was born. However, this is from the outside looking in. I'm not seeing it necessarily directly in the research, but from a commercial perspective, focus shockwave machines back then were expensive and they were big. So radial shockwave was born off of that. Small, compact, affordable to make, treats the big seven we mentioned before: your Achilles, plantar fascia, patella, GTP, the hip, shoulder, elbow, wrist. I always get to the shoulder, I forget.
Back to shoulder.
So yeah, shoulder, yeah. So to clarify, shoulder, elbow, wrist. Once you hit those big seven, it's good at being able to treat those seven regions. That's where radial was born, and it's grown from there. It's grown in popularity now. There has been controversy because the research, I think the commerciality of just this product anyway has left quite a lot of contradictory information. This might be a conversation for another day in terms of the research, but in terms of that. But essentially in the last sort of decade, I'd say focused has kind of really come back into the fore. The machines are smaller, they're more affordable. The research has kind of circled back round as well. So we're kind of like, and today I'd say it's a pretty good mix of radial and focused shockwave in the UK. Obviously, we'll speak on the UK perspective. Is being quite regularly used now across private practice, sport, and NHS.
Yeah, great. So let's say we've got radial shockwave, focus shockwave, heavily, across the market there. So what are the key differences then between those two technologies that it is important for clinicians to understand?
Sure. So, I mean, you can get into the science physics side of things, of which we've got as a couple of papers that we'll likely share in one of our other articles at some point in the future, and just breaking down the physical characteristics of radial shockwave, focus shockwave, and shockwave in general. For the layman, radial shockwave is generally considered as a pressure wave, slightly different pressure profile to what shockwave is. How it produces the energy is as a projectile that goes backwards and forwards within a chamber that's usually sent backwards and forwards by either compressed air or electromagnetic force. The projectile hits off the end of an applicator, and that sends the energy outwards into the tissues. Hence, radial radiates out. It's a terrible analogy, but it's like a shotgun effect. Very good at short range, hits everything in quite a good vicinity, but the further it goes away, the energy and the impact reduces. generally speaking, if you pass 3 centimeters, the effects kind of like drop off.
Mm-hmm.
Focus shockwave is kind of like the flip. Rather than the energy radiating out, the energy is created from a wider area and brings it into a particular point. You can control the depth on this as well, or where the point of treatment is. Energy levels are much higher as well. I mean, you're talking, 4 to 5 bar on a radial shockwave. On a focus shockwave, you could be 500, 600 bar at the peak pressure point. It's quite high, but it happens in a nanosecond. It's instant. So it's like, it's a lot of pressure, but it's happens so quickly. And that's a bit more of it. Again, if I take the shotgun effect, we have the sniper effect. So it's a terrible analogy. I'm sorry, it's the best one I've got. Where you're going to focus in onto one particular point. You find that indication, you hit it, you're kind of done. As yes and no in that sense. But hopefully that makes sense for people. So radial, if you've got a superficial injury, Achilles tendon is a good example, you're going to hit it. 9 times out of 10, you're going to hit it. It's more uncomfortable because all the energy is delivered at the surface of the skin, so you're hitting all the nerve endings. Focus shockwave, though, because we can identify the depth of where the pathology is, so an Achilles tendon, most likely you're at 10 mil, 1 centimeter down, is that we can deliver that energy at that particular depth. And because we're bypassing the surface of the skin, quite often on healthy tissue, you don't feel that treatment. When you hit pathology, it replicates the pain or symptoms. So it's a kind of bit of a difference in experience of the patient as well.
Yeah.
But to kind of like drum it down, there is a difference in the pressure, the energy that it emits, and there's a difference in how the actual energy is delivered. So with the radial at the surface of the skin radiating out, focused, delivered at the skin, obviously, but can be controlled in terms of the depth of where the therapeutic effect happens. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think it's important, like say, for people to understand that they are two different mechanisms, aren't they, of treatment, like two completely different pieces of technology, really, when you're explaining it like that and how the shockwave is produced, like they are very different in that perspective.
Yeah, they are, and it's kind of like this umbrella thing, right? And the kind of biggest kind of comparator I have is we work in the diagnostic ultrasound space, right? So medical imaging umbrella term, and under that you have diagnostic ultrasound and MRI. Now you can scan a knee with both of those things, but they give you different images and you use it for a different reason. Like ultrasound's more dynamic, whereas MRI is static. They give you different things and you'd use them for different reasons. It's the same with radial and focused. It's not necessarily a case of, do I need that one or that one? You could have both.
Yeah.
If you're not restricted by budget, bloody fantastic. It's great. You could do that. But it's just really understanding, like with ultrasound and like with MRI, they're offering you something different. And with radial and focused, yes, there is crossover because they treat the same indications, the treatment delivery in terms of the frequency of the shots being delivered and the total shots, like usually 2,500 shots for a treatment, is very much similar. You're pointing and shooting onto the area. The actual application of the delivery of treatment is very, very similar. However, they are still very different. So it's like, and that's understandably where some of the confusion comes in as well. So I'm hoping we can kind of break it down a little bit and make it a bit more understandable.
Yeah, definitely. I think, like I say, you were explaining it there as well. I think it definitely is, like I say, layman terms, but just like I say, saying that they are different and they are offering something different. So with regards to sort of further differences, obviously something that we've covered in the article on this topic is obviously cost differences between radial and focus. So could you just explain a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, so the cost differences between them.
Yeah, which obviously is a key difference, isn't it, between the types that we're looking at.
I mean, as I mentioned in this kind of story of Shockwave, is that radial was the offshoot off of focus because it was more affordable to make. So from a commercial perspective, it's better for the companies because they could sell more kit. Obviously, clinically it works. So that's really the fundamental. Clinically it works. Tendinopathy, really, really scalable as well from that perspective. So, I mean, radial systems, you're looking at sort of 6 to 8 grand plus the VAT. Focus systems, sorry, are about 20 to 25,000, some up to 30. Obviously plus the VAT, so quite a disparity in the price. Now, radial shockwaves, my humble opinion and experience, I wouldn't really go much below 6 grand, maybe 5 at a stretch. Would you go above 8 grand? Maybe. It's like for these column systems, obviously we've got them with the longest. Is there much difference between them? probably not. In terms of the energy, the output, and all that kind of thing. If you're going above sort of 12 to 13,000 on a radial machine, yeah, again, it's all about independent choice, but I think it's probably 6 to 8 grand is like a safe bet in terms of you'll get a decent system for that price. So you don't have to pay over the odds. If you're paying up to like 15, 16, 17,000 pounds plus VAT for a radial machine, seriously consider looking at a focused. Save a few more quid, because you're basically in that ballpark anyway. So it's that kind of thing. Obviously, each their own, but generally speaking, 6 to 8 grand on a radial machine, 20 to 25 plus VAT. Obviously, all plus VAT on that for a focused.
Yeah. So with regards to this is a question that does come up quite a bit. So obviously there is a big difference there with regards to radial and focus. So with the price point of the focus, like what is justifying that such larger amount of price to obviously the shockwave? Obviously we know the clinical application range is different. Obviously it's a different mechanism, but what is that sort of response when people are asking sort of that justification of the big jumps of the different types?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's a multitude of things which we won't have necessarily too much time to go in today, but I mean, if I look at like a bit of a direct comparison, so for radial treatment depth, maximum impact between 3 to 4 centimeters. For a focus system, depending on the therapy source that you've got and depending on the system, you could be getting to depths of 10, maybe 12 centimeters. So you've got a lot of option there. So you can hit like proximal hamstrings, adductors, mid-belly calves, and whatever else. With focus shockwave, where you're going to be quite limited with the radial. So the choice of depth depth of the treatment is a good comparison. The energy being delivered as well, I think, is a big thing. So you got like sort of 4 to 5 bar of pressure, focus shockwave much higher. But the big thing is like, in terms of the method of how it's delivered, radial is a victim more of attenuation, so that reflection, diffraction, and whatever else. So as the energy goes to the tissue, it gets absorbed, it gets deflected, reflected. So as the energy travels, it reduces considerably more. For focus, that's less of an issue, because the way the energy is delivered and it's coming into a particular point, we have like depth control pads that can change the space between the therapy source and the focal point, your therapeutic point of treatment. So if we set it at 3 centimeters, between 3 and 0, it's not really having any therapeutic effect. And the energy you're delivering, let's say 0.2 millijoules per meter square, that is being delivered at that depth. It's not having an attenuation doesn't have as much an effect. So that's another aspect as well that you can consider. And if you are seeing deeper indications, then that's certainly something to consider. The other aspect is obviously the application of the indication even. So radial, predominantly chronic tendinopathy and plantar fasciitis. Focused, you can do subacute, acute, chronic. The acute kind of application is up for debate for some people. Generally, if it's like a slight irritation, it's a pain management thing, that's where you likely use focus there. But yeah, then you'd think past tendons and chronic tendons with focus shockwave. You're looking at ligament, bone. If you're looking at men's health, you could do women's health, chronic pelvic pain aspects. We also work with Hull University, who've been using it for intermittent claudication. There's been a massive research paper on that, and wound care, so diabetic foot ulcers, that kind of thing. So there's more application there. So there's more scope of growth with that. Whether that's your bag or not, there's more option, and ultimately, kind of circle back to, it gives you more choice.
No, it's good.
So
that definitely answers it. So with regards to we mentioned before about they are different, so they can be used at the same, they can both be used. So how can clinicians obviously integrate both radial and focused into practice? How does that benefit?
So you can use both, like you can, and it's like with most things, it can be multimodality. You can use most things, and because they're different pressure waveforms, you can arguably use them both potentially in the same treatment. Maybe some might argue not, but it all depends. We have a lot of clinics that start with a radial system because budget, it's better to introduce, kind of thing. Some people say, if I get a focus one, does that make my radial redundant? Not necessarily. Now, if you're a business coming from the business mindset, right, is that if I've got a radial machine, I've had it for 2 years, it cost me, I don't know, £7,000, including the VAT. And over the last 2 years, it's generated me £30,000 of gross revenue, say. I'd like to think that in that time, right, that £7,000 is paid off. So that machine is zero on my books. It's done its job, it's made its money, it's paid itself off, it's done. So if I bring a focus machine in and my radial does become redundant, because we'd prefer using the focused, not really a big headache for me. It's because, well, that radial machine did its job, it's paid off, it's fine. However, on the flip side, if I've got 3 or 4 clinicians, I now have 2 machines that I can actually have running. So my throughput, my revenue goes up. I could create a differential in price. Maybe that's an option. Or we do know there are some people that don't respond to focus that actually respond to radial, and vice versa. Why? Don't know. It's a mechanical therapy. People respond to mechanical input differently. That's what I kind of put it down to anyway. So, you can have both in practice. There's no stress with that. Some people just jump straight to focus because they see a lot of stress reaction stuff in runners, or they see a lot of ligament stuff, or they see a lot of proximal hamstring issues, whatever their reasoning. They might want to just say, look, in my area, everybody's got a radial system. I want to be different. I want to focused. And that's their reasoning. Fine. But yeah, I mean, it's like, you don't need one or the other. You could use both, but sometimes the decision can just be down to which one can I afford.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Excellent. Well, I think, thanks, Dom, for the insights on this one. Like I say, we've got an article as well if people prefer to read up, or following this episode, you can also read some of the information as well that we've covered. So, thanks, Dom.
Absolutely. No problem. Thank you.